Thank you to Me Too and Time's Up for giving me a voice at age 78 after formally going on a journey at age 20 aimed to understand if a root cause could be found that incited human history's addiction to verbal, physical, and sexual abuse, and might answer why our species was unable to break our dependency on jealousy, envy, and greed, as well as robotically perpetuating personal and public wars, prejudice, generation gaps, violence, and alienation. Would there ever be a simple answer to end human suffering? When in 1969, an epiphany came in a dream and was shared with enthusiastic audiences who were able to absorb the aha moment of sudden revelation that literally set them free, and plans were made to share the journey to labor liberation and agape love with the world. Two men in positions of power, one in 1972, one in 1976, sexually assaulted me, with one threatening my life if I did not stop sharing the insights with others, while the second, after raping me, slid his finger along the throat demanding that I be quiet about this or else. A few more people ruthlessly tried to stop the story from coming out, including, most recently, a journalist at the New York Times who lied to her editor in order to dismiss the New York Times 2017 publisher, now Chairman Arthur, having requested that this story be told. The two sexual assaults led to decades of dissociation, amnesia, and PTSD until a KGB spy broke the no-tell hell spell. A promise kept to a KGB spy. Dear Presidents Putin, Xi, Trump, the United Nations, and the leaders of every country in the world. This is a preview of the documentary series, Daring to Reboot Our Thinking. A true story written, directed, and presented by a person first, labeled Justin Thomas. Thanks to a promise kept to a KGB spy. Thanks also to a promise kept to Princess Diana and Edward Jones, servant to Queen Elizabeth II. Each experienced this true story and requested it be shared with every baby that won the being born lottery, knowing we can unlearn human history's addiction to diseases deadlier than cancer and more addictive than opiates, jealousy, envy, and greed. Since we each came out of our mother's womb, one person at a time, naked, unmasked, and life-free, then found ourselves, actually lost ourselves, kidnapped and hypnotized into a groupthink, polarized, bluffing, card game like trance, labeled, categorized, pigeonholed, and ordered to think we are merely symbols confined to our age, gender, race, etc. The KGB spy, Princess Diana, and Edward Jones saw the value of escaping the wombs of all labeled groupthink pecking orders. By joining this 21st century court-jesting card game joker who experienced enough losing and winning to be propelled free from the card game like trance, kidnapped babies of any age can choose to have an ego-transcending rebirth right here on Earth by becoming a dehypnotizer and breaking all dichotomizing spells and repeating a heartfelt reflection that guarantees enlightenment by saying, I welcome every baby born to have 52 cards within, escaping groupthink trances, lie free, one person at a time. Do not disturb or abort rebirth beyond groupthink. Once we both know we have 52 cards within, we can lay our cards on the table, get beyond the bluffing, to recognize that we are process, energy, change, dances of life, instead of winners versus losers, or winners who manufacture losers in order to remain winners. We can lay our cards on the table, be real with one another, and be free. And all we have to do is put the alphabet in our hand, blow all the letters away, and what have you got? Label liberation. This is an open response to the New York Times. The publisher of the New York Times was very interested in my true story, and I was interviewed last week. But it's important to me to know that it gets through without any kind of distortion to President Trump, and more directly than possible, President Putin. Now I'll tell you why. A KGB man said to me, "You have to promise to tell your story to the United Nations and the leaders of every country of the world." I made that promise, and I'm keeping that promise now. The manuscript is being edited in New York, and there is an unprecedented several-hour documentary in post-production. There's interest in motion picture rights and a musical that might be able to play worldwide. So here goes. My mother used to say, if you read, something will happen to your brain, you'll die. She also used to say, just looking at you makes you want to puke, and she'd run to the bathroom and vomit. So for the first 20 years, there was verbal, physical, and sexual abuse from within my family. And what happened is, I went into a foster home at 20. My foster father was with MI5, British and North American Intelligence, and I asked to see a psychiatrist to understand why I've never passed out of grade 1, why my mother would say you have a brain like a sieve, stupid, idiot, moron, nitwit, dimwit, etc. And I guess I wasn't sure how brainwashing really worked. So I believed them, both my parents. After being beaten regular basis, my father would put a pillow over my head and lie on top of me and try to suffocate me, saying, "You stupid idiot, moron, you nitwit, you dimwit, you geek," repeatedly as I fought to try and breathe. So I think that kind of propelled me into the present, and I kept asking, why? What did I do? Why am I being beaten? And I was laughed at and ridiculed for asking such stupid questions, because it's just human nature. Well, I had to find out why. So, President Putin, I will tell you why I'm directing this to you, as well as to President Trump, President Xi, and to the United Nations and the leaders of every country of the world. I went on a quest, and when I went into my foster home, I asked to see a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist, Dr. Michael D. Tuckty, was very caring and said to me after my first session, "What you've been through is far more devastating than a concentration camp experience." I thought, how is that possible? Toronto the Good, concentration camp, dead bodies. And he said, in a concentration camp, you know who the enemy is, and you had no one to validate your reality, and that's really crazy making. And it's amazing you survived intact. And he said, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, I can't read or count. I've never passed out of grade 1. And he said, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, I'd like to understand what causes wars and prejudice and generation gaps and violence, alienation, depression, suicide, crime. And he said, do it. When he said, do it, I did it. I went on a quest, and traveling with my foster father, whoever I met, I would ask them, any suggestions as to how we can get to the core of human conflict? And I'd also say to them, what's the most hurtful thing that ever happened to you? And I kind of logged the responses. So I was in a restaurant with my foster father, and two men were talking about a course in human communication that they were organizing. And the tables were really close, and I couldn't help but overhear them. And I said, excuse me, is it possible for a dropout to attend? And this one man, Donald Thiel, linguistic professor, said, it's for professors only. So I was gaining some confidence by that time, and I said to my foster father, and they're in human communication. So the other man, Mark Slade, kind of chuckled and asked me what I dropped out of, or what college. And I said, well, I've never been to college, I've never been to high school, and I've never passed out of grade 1 public school. I can't read or count, but I'm doing independent studies, probing barriers hindering human communication. And he took my name and address and invited me to 2 courses. The first one was at York University for professors only. So I went there very frightened. And as soon as I got there, a woman professor said to me, why are you wearing mirrored sunglasses? And I said, I guess I'm afraid if you look me in the eye, you'll see that I'm retarded. And she said to me, please take them off. I took them off, and she said, don't ever worry about what other people think. And she told me that I've been having a love affair with my brother ever since I was 16, she said. And we're still going strong. And I realized, the first thought was a woman professor having a love affair with her brother. The second thought was, I believe she's trying to help me see that she doesn't care what I think. So that's her lesson to me, not to worry about what other people think. And then she said to me, see the blackboard. I think it was a green board. And she said, there's a wheel of education there. And Mark Slade, who's organized this program for professors only, wants all of us to let go of our spoke of the wheel that's a specialty and move to the hub of the wheel, hub of the wheel of education. And she said, you know what? You're worried about never having passed out of grade 1 and being unable to read or count? You are closer to the hub than any of us professors, because you have less to unlearn. And what a gift she gave me in that moment. And from that time on, I was never concerned or felt intimidated by anyone, no matter what they knew or how many degrees they had, because I realized with whatever knowledge they had more to unlearn than I did. I was closer to the hub of the wheel of education than a lot of people. And it allowed me to find balance in my life and to continue my quest. Then Mark Slade invited me to the second course at the National Film Board, where we watch many movies. And I see good guys, bad guys, and I start seeing symbolism, and how my mother was labeled the devil and the jinx, and her sister was labeled the pretty one and the clever one, the beautiful one, the brilliant one, kind of superior to everyone, kind of our family royalty. And my mother's father abandoned her because she wasn't the boy to replace a dead son. He went to New York as a playwright and an actor, and had an affair with a married actress. And when she went back to her husband, my grandfather shot her. Fortunately, she was a good actress. She played dead. and he turned the gun on himself and committed suicide at age 23. So back in Toronto, my grandmother then blames my mother for not being the boy that would have kept my grandfather in Toronto, and labels her the devil and the jinx, gives birth to Dorothy, the pretty one, clever one, marries a widower and has my Aunt Gert. Gert's the angel, the diamond, the good as gold one, the most wonderful person to walk the face of this earth. And I realized that these are scripts and roles imposed on them, and Dr. Tukti helped me understand the word projection and how whatever's repressed is projected out, where we put people down or up. We don't see them as people, we see them as symbols, but we only do that to the degree we're symbols to ourselves. So to leave the house of mirrors with all distortions, to leave the emotional roller coaster, to step off it, all I had to do was unlearn the programming and the polarizations that my parents had. My father was called the nothing. One of his eldest brothers was the brilliant one who's going to be a millionaire. And so everyone was dissected into categories and pigeonholed. And when I went to Mexico City after my foster father married, and this Latino professor said to me, don't worry about the fact you can't read or count. Go to California. The whole human potential movement is there. So I realized there are places where people are more fine-tuned to what's going on. And he said, get 2 letters of recommendation from those 2 courses at York University and the Film Board. And by the way, Mark Slade at the Film Board had said to me, and to each participant, to do a response. And when I said, can I continue my research as my response? And he says, oh, of course. I said, how much time do I have? He said, take all the time you want. You have full support of the National Film Board, the Canadian government, and off I went. So from Mexico, I went to California after getting 2 letters of recommendation from Donald Thiel and Mark Slade, and glowing letters related to my participation, because I didn't feel the pressure of having to write an exam. All I had to do was be in the moment and experience whatever was happening, seeing the movies and reflecting on them as they relate to life. And as soon as I got to UCLA, I went to see Colin Young, the head of theater arts. And it was forbidden by my mother for me to do anything creative. For one thing, she had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is an illness where if nurses have it, they sometimes kill their patient in order to gain sympathy. If mothers have it, they sometimes pick one child and that child is deliberately made ill or seen as being ill in order to, for the mother to gain sympathy and feel superior to someone. So I went to see Colin Young because he was the head of theater arts, and I was interested in the creative arts, which was verboten. So what happened is Colin Young asked me to talk about my life, and I shared my journey, and he said, consider yourself a freshman. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're a freshman at UCLA. So here, no reading, no counting, no real public school. I kept failing grade 1 3 times. They moved me along, but they didn't know what to do with the person who had no capacity for higher education. So I then had a panic, went into a panic, and went to the counseling center. And the head of the counseling center said, you're 28, you don't look over 16. I'm going to enroll you at the Fernald Clinic School here for children with learning disorders. So to get me to read, they had me talk about flashbacks. and they type it up the next day. So I learned to read my own words, and it was a technique that worked. I broke the spell of, if you read, something will happen to your brain, you'll die, and I was learning to read. And I had an aha. And the aha was based on many years ago. And by the way, I should say, I was taken under wing by Eric Byrne of Games People Play, and Fritz Perls of Gestalt Therapy, and Virginia Satir, and Carl Faber. He was the most popular lecturer at UCLA. And he said to me, he didn't understand projection until he met me. And he said, even though he studied at the Jungian Institute in Zurich, I had been so projected on to believe that I was retarded that it really clicked for him, the whole phenomenon of projection. So when he said that, it really broke the spell. All the other therapists, I was very limited in money. They saw me, there was no charge. And Carl Faber saw me 3 times a week, and he said, you're teaching me as much as I'm teaching you. Don't worry about any cost. And he asked me to speak to a group of teachers, and before long, I was asked to speak to a convention of deans of students, and life made some kind of real cycle for me. So in essence, what happened is the retard starts recognizing there's a place off the teeter-totter, and that we all deserve to experience life off the teeter-totter. And my father, my biological father, many years ago, when I was about 11 or 12, he gave me a miniature deck of cards. And up until then, when they played poker and gin rummy and that, the whole family, they put a deck of cards up, fling them on the floor for me, Stanley the retard, to play 52 pickup. That's all I could do, because they said he was so brainless, that I was so brainless that I couldn't even know how to play cards. So my father gave me this miniature deck of cards. It's probably the only gift I had been given. And we go over to his millionaire brother's place, Saul, on Richview Avenue, and show them to my cousin Gary, who was a couple of years younger than me. And when Gary hands them back to me, my father grabs them and gives them to Gary. And I guess I was distressed. So my father handed me one joker and said, the joker is the most valuable card in the deck. And then he walked over to Gary, and I heard him whisper, the joker is worthless. So I had heard that my mother had divorced my father and was remarrying, and someone that freaked my Aunt Dorothy out, because she was the beautiful one, the clever one, front stage center star of her life and the family. But she really wasn't star of her own life, because she needed to compare herself with her 2 sisters, my mother the devil, Gert the angel. So what happened is, my father was very depressed when my mother married again. And so I had heard about it, and I was doing intervention with other people, helping them work through their issues, as well as processing my own. And I flew up on a night flight to Toronto and knocked on my father's apartment door, and he seemed kind of surprised. There were liquor bottles and all this from chain smoking, cigarette butts all over. And I just stood on a chair and with a kind of the magic marker, drew a teeter-totter, picture of his millionaire brother Saul with crown, holding bags of money, his mother, their mother, in worship of him, and then a stick figure of my father at the bottom of the teeter-totter wearing a dunce cap. And I said, do you want to go to the top of the teeter-totter, stay at the bottom of the teeter-totter, or do you want to step off the teeter-totter? So he kind of looked a little bit shy, and he said, step off the teeter-totter? I said, good for you. And then, as we talked, I shared everything that I had learned in psychology, connecting the dots to the fact that we are all potentially free until we get these scripts and roles imposed on us to be polarized with others. And one group will be polarized with another group, one sibling with another sibling, etc. And so my father suddenly said to me, if I'd gone to university like you're going to, I would know more than you stupid idiot moron, you nitwit, you dimwit, you geek. And as soon as he said that, it was the first time in my life that I ever felt my anger and attacked back. Because when bullies used to beat me up, my mother would threaten to kill me if I ever hit back any of the bullies. And as soon as my father would come home, kill him, Harold, kill him, and the beatings would start and that. So I never fought back. This time, I punched him in the nose. I kicked in the television. There was a very inexpensive painting that looked like it was a fake Paris-style painting. And I went and got a knife and I slashed that. And he said, I'm going to call the police. And I left. But I do want to say that before I left, I told him how hurt I was that he had given me a miniature deck of cards and took them back and gave them to my cousin. Well, when I got back to California, there was a letter from him and a miniature deck of cards and his admission to himself, really, that he had never learned to communicate, and he apologized. And that's kind of all I needed at that time, I believed, just to come back from California to Toronto. Along with that, I had two experiences in California that I brought back with me. One was meeting Dr. Paul Simonoff, a psychophysiologist and psychiatrist from Moscow who came to study the hippies. And he said to me that he was interested in my research of trying to probe barriers and get to the core of human conflict, and that he was going to tell me Russia's top secret. I said, seriously? He said, seriously. So he wrote fear and an arrow to anger, and then information. He said, fear causes anger, information cancels out the fear, cancels out the anger. And I said, in almost like a response, fear causes anger, fear causes labels. Labels can kill. Information can kill the fear, the anger, and the labels. And he said, da! And poured us some vodka. That's when I designed the I'm a person first label liberation button. You put the alphabet in your hand, blow all the letters away. And when my father had given me that miniature deck of cards in the mail, I had a dream, or it was a vision. And there was a 16-year-old kid in the class, because the kids were all 11 to 16, and they assumed I was their age, and the teachers knew, but they felt I wasn't going to be disruptive because I probably looked 14, not 16. And so I said to this kid, I had a dream about you, and in the dream, I was supposed to tell you something. He says, okay. And I said, now I noticed recess, you're very articulate. But in the class, at the clinic school, you kind of play like one of the dumb kids, like I had been scripted to play. So would you agree if I tell you what I dreamed, that if life is like a card game, that winners and losers need each other for reflection? He says, oh, sure, you have to have one to have the other. And I said, well, what do you do with the joker? He said, you discard the joker. I said, what else do you do with the joker? He said, you highly value the joker. I said, have you ever been discarded, like rejected in your life? He says, uh-huh. I said, have you ever been highly valued? He said, uh-huh, but my brother has. My parents are always saying how brilliant he is. I said, oh, really? And what does your brother do? And he said, oh, he's a very well-known disc jockey in Los Angeles. So I said, well, am I valuing you right now? He said, I think so. So I said, will you hold out your hand, please? And I said, once you know you have 52 cards within, and I wrote 52 with my finger. And I said, once you know that I have 52 cards within, will you write 52 with your finger? And he wrote 52. And I said, let's not forget, let's press our wrists together. I said, once we both know we have 52 cards within, we can lay our cards on the table, get beyond the bluffing. See that most people are hypnotized, as my dream pointed out, in a card game trance, literally thinking we're winners or losers or lucky or unlucky, that we're prisoners trapped in a house of mirrors. And all we have to do is put the alphabet in our hand, blow all the letters away, and what have you got? Label liberation. Shortly after that, and when I say shortly after that, the next morning, he knocked on my dorm door. He found his way to my off-campus dorm. And Weyburn Hall in Westwood. And he said, Justin, I collect rocks. And he had a beautiful turquoise rock. He said, this is my favorite rock from me to you, from one joker to the other. And as he did that, he had tears in his eyes. And I thought, oh my God, this metaphor of transcending the card game trance to recognize that we are process, energy, change, dances of life, instead of winners versus losers, or winners who manufacture losers in order to remain winners. We can lay our cards on the table, be real with one another, and be free from all projection. And that's what happened. His awakening helped me awaken an understanding that all the interviews I did with people, asking them how can we get to the core of human conflict, traveling with my foster father, revealed to me that we are process energy change, imprisoned in a card game trance. And that we were all born having won the lottery, the being born lottery, the sperm and egg that make it. What a gift to be born. And then we come out of the womb naked, unmasked, no lies. We don't know lies. We're spontaneous. We have the capacity to feel. And then we're quickly cocooned into one pecking order group after another, labeled, categorized, pigeonholed, and taught, brainwashed, hypnotized to think we're in a card game. So there are politicians who have to win by manufacturing losers and making losers out of people who aren't losers, maybe from another culture, another country, another sexual orientation, whatever. And basically, another religion. And as we dare open up to one person, one human being, and keep no secrets, tell no lies, then 52 cards equal 52 cards. When we see everyone democratically as our equal, in essence, No secrets, no lies. There is no one then to despise. After designing the I'm a Person First label liberation button, making them available to people at no charge because we all deserve something else for nothing, in addition to being born. I decided to go on stage to get off stage at the St. Lawrence Center to strip bare of all the projections imposed on me, lay my cards on the table with everyone, and not fearing having a pregnant moment, getting beyond the stinking thinking. By this time, I had read the Gospel according to Thomas, and the one portion, and Jesus said, when you make the two one, the inner is the outer is the inner, the above is the below is the above, the male and female into the single one, so male will not be male, female not be female. See people beyond the roles. Eyes in a place of an eye, hand in a place of a hand, foot in a place of a foot, and an image in a place of an image, then you shall enter the kingdom. So I started thinking, the 2-1, inner is the outer, no mask. The above is the below. No one's less than us in terms of essential value. Every baby born has 52 cards within. Men and women, we project onto women certain roles, onto men certain roles. Men can't be this way, women can't be that way. And yet, these are scripts. And then to enter the kingdom, to connect all the dots, all we have to do is be present in the now. But how can we be here now if we're taught to see each other as symbols? And who are the first two symbols we see in childhood, if not mother and father? So if my mother's walking down the street, do you see my mother's mother first or person first? Person first, of course. How would I see your mother? Person first. How do you see your own mother? Mother first. The day we can begin to see our mothers clearly, objectively, respectfully, in a whole way, as human beings who had a childhood where they were maybe put down or put up. If they're put up, they sometimes don't want anyone to be their equal. If they're rejected, sometimes they have a better chance of trying to sort of figure out who we are and what's going on. But to see mother as a person first, then we're able to see everyone as a person first. And alphabet, label liberation. Then Buddha, what did Buddha say? He said, get beyond the programmed monkey mind. He didn't maybe use the word program, psychological word, but he knew psychology. And both Jesus and Buddha and all the spiritual teachers had psychological insights. And all Buddha said, really, in essence, was breathe, focus on the breath. That'll take us away from the thought process that most people so identify with. They don't know that they're more than thoughts. And I'll give you an example of how I was able to step back from my thoughts. So here, I had 20 years of brainwashing that I was retarded, no capacity to learn, I'm the idiot, the moron, helpless, hopeless, worthless, and brainless, so my parents could feel superior to someone because they were inferior, supposedly, to their siblings. So, what happened is Dr. Carl Faber, when he took me under wing, he said to me, you've got to overcome your belief that you have no capacity to learn. He said there's about 7 or 8 people through every century who are really, really awake and very insightful, very psychically attuned to the world and great depth. And he said, you're one of them. So of course I couldn't handle that. I was terrified of my parents' jealousy and envy. And I had a friend, Harvey, who used to say to me, eat shit and dine. If you're ever successful, I'm going to kill you. So I had that to deal with too. So when Carl said he said, Justin, you have to recognize that you're not retarded. You're brilliant. And I said, well, are you one of the 7 or 8 people every century that you would know I am? Trying to slough it off. And he said, Justin, you've got to recognize you're not retarded, you're brilliant. So about half an hour later, I was walking on campus, and there were a group of guys talking, and I overheard them as I'm walking by calling someone brilliant. And I stopped, and I just felt this flush of rage. How dare whoever they're talking about be brilliant? Carl said there's only 7 or 8 of us in 1 century. And if Carl's one and I'm one, how can that be that this person is too? But I watched my thoughts. I observed that crazy thinking, and I started to laugh. And I walked over to the guys. I said, I heard what you were saying. May I ask who you were talking about? And they said, well, they're engineering students. This was an engineering professor. And so I explained what I had just gone through. And we all laughed and shook hands. And I'll never forget that. From that day on, I understood there was a place beyond the programmed mind. Winner, loser, lucky, unlucky. My mother's a devil, Gert's the angel. And Gert was on morphine. For the first 7 years, she took care of me for menstrual cramps. So she was out of control. Calling me her little man. Come here, little guinea pig. I'm going to marry you when you grow up. Giving me her breast, licking, sucking, and all this sort of thing. This is my angel. Aunt Gert, Dorothy, above and beyond it all. She came to see me before she died, knowing she was dying, to apologize for having deliberately babysat me once, deliberately flipping the lever on the crib. I don't know if you can see it, but there's an indentation here. I landed on my head. Turns out my mother had tripped her when they were little girls. My mother being jealous of Dorothy, getting all the affection. And so Dorothy had to be rushed to the hospital. They did stitches. She had a scar on her forehead. And then I had this one too. So I certainly accepted and was grateful for her apology. And it wasn't until she died that I remember hearing she died. I came back to be with her, and then left to come back to California before the funeral. When I heard she died, I just got up, went to the mirror, and it was as if for the first time in my life, I saw the scar on my forehead. I wasn't able to let that in. So, what I discovered was that everyone is made up of atoms and space, and that is our identity until we get lured into this kind of trance. And look what politicians have done to polarize in different countries. Like, I'm an American now, and to polarize people into Democrats versus Republicans, and how Republicans and Democrats sometimes are unable to find that bridge of common ground, when all we have to do, alphabet, labor liberation. I'm a person first, you're a person first. So to bring this into the now, and to keep my word to a KGB man, to share with you President Putin and President Trump the fact that we really don't need to activate more wars and prejudice and generation gaps and violence and alienation and depression and suicide and crime. All we have to do is look within, dare to be bare, dare to be naked, Dare to be real. Dare to be authentic. And dare to respect the process of healing, which we all can go through as we journey through that, an inner space journey, almost like an inner astronaut, from groupthink to rebirth as a person first. So, to bring this verbal letter to a conclusion, I have to tell you what happened related to Mark Slade when I came back to Toronto after presenting in Toronto, London, and Paris. I unmasked, as I mentioned, where I went on stage to get off stage at the St. Lawrence Centre, and then in London, I came out as a joker in the card game. And Queen Elizabeth's senior servant, Edward Jones, had read a letter to the Queen that I had written that had been published, and insisted on helping me in and out of my costume in front of audiences. He had a kidney ailment that couldn't be cured at that time, and he knew he was close to death. And he understood that I had gone through an identity death as the retard who discovered that we all have 52 cards within. And so as I laid my cards on the table to audiences, there was a lot of healing, mutual healing that went on. One man yelled, "This is changing my life." This guy, Eric, said to me, "I'm from Germany, and my family are Nazis. And I was a Nazi when I came into this theater tonight. And I'm not a Nazi anymore after hearing your journey. Can I give you a hug?" Of course I gave him a hug. And then there was a man standing between them, and then there was a woman, and she said, "I'm Bonnie Lutz. I was here the night before. I have to tell you, I had to come back to say I slept with the lights up for the first time in a long time. And if you ever come to Japan, I'd love you to meet my family, my parents and my sister. And I happen to be Japan's Coca-Cola girl. And you are a friend." And so we corresponded. What happened is, then Jean-Louis Barrault invited me to Paris to do the unmasking again at Theatre de Nation. And they did simultaneous translation. I come back to Toronto. Federico Fellini invited me to come to Rome. He was interested in doing a film about my quest. And then Mark Slade called from the film board, and he said, "My colleagues saw your presentation, whether it was a speaking engagement, a workshop, or one of the theater events, Beyond Comedy and Tragedy Theater, no theater. And where I, monologue, song, and dance, I shared the cycle of the journey." And he said, "They're suggesting we do a documentary." And he said, "Would you be open to that?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Okay, well, the film board can do it, but I'm afraid to hear what you have to say." And I said, "Why is that, Mark?" He said, "Well, they're calling you an Einstein of the social sciences." I said, "An Einstein? Nothing to be afraid of, Mark. I was taking grade 1 3 years ago at the clinic school. I say things on an 8-year-old level so that I can understand it." So he invited me to present it at the film board in Montreal. And when I took the train there, I changed into the Joker's costume. And after unmasking to him, sharing the full cycle, he rushed over and put his arms around me, squeezed me very tightly. "I don't want you to put out your book. I don't want you to do your play. No more talk on labor liberation. No more media. Instead, I want you to be my lover, work with me at the film board. And with what you learned, the two of us will be very powerful together. More powerful than," and he mentioned his colleague, whose name I don't remember, and his lover, Norman McLaren, will be much more powerful than them. And I actually interpreted that he was enthusiastic, like the man in London who yelled, "This is changing my life," as I was presenting. But it turns out that he became very obsessive and tried to sexually assault me. And I fought him off after he wrote me this bizarre love letter and death threat that I thought would not affect me. I thought I had built up enough understanding that I would be free from anyone's attempt to throw anyone off base. And it turned out that that wasn't true, that the 20 years with my parents that I thought I had cleared away, where my mother was always, "You're gonna end up with a knife in your back, and kill him, Harold, kill him," and she'd stand outside the bedroom door when he was beating me. It triggered a dissociation and post-traumatic stress. Then a clergyman, Rabbi Eisen, came to see me to apologize for Rabbi Feinberg, stealing my 7 pages on label liberation. He said, "Why aren't you promoting label liberation? What happened to your book?" I show him this bizarre love letter from Mark Slade and this written death threat. And he said, "You better see a lawyer about this." So he had me see Bill Graham, a lawyer. And Bill Graham asked me to share the whole cycle with him, which I did. I told Bill Graham about my breakthrough to label liberation, then Slade's attack, triggering non-stop terrifying flashbacks of his sexual assault and death threats. Over and over again, Mark Slade's words immobilized me. "Don't ever do your play again. No more talks or workshops on label liberation. Stop all media interviews. Instead, keep what you have learned just for me. I want you to become my lover. Come work with me at the film board. And with what you've learned, the two of us will be very powerful together. More powerful than my colleague and his lover, Norman McLaren. And we will be even more powerful than them, or I'll kill you." Then I told Bill Graham that Mark Slade's sexual assault and verbal and written death threats left me split off and dissociated with PTSD. When I finished, he saw the album, the songs, and the letter from Mark Slade and the death threat. He said, "Governments will save multi-millions of dollars on your research." And I said, "Yes, George Rohn, the head of international mental health, called it an evolutionary leap to consciousness and wants me to travel the world promoting it, but I'm too intimate, too frightened to." So Bill Graham, I said, "Would you call a taxi for me?" Because I had a suitcase with all kinds of letters and material to show him. And he offered me, he said, no, I'll give you a lift home. He stopped at his house and raped me. Now, who could believe you see a lawyer about a sexual assault and he says, come up for a minute, and rapes me, holding me down. You be quiet about this or else. Sort of another death threat. So I became immobilized, fled Canada for the States, began therapy there to keep myself from suicide. And then I was offered a scholarship to get a BA, MA, PhD. People can give themselves their own LLD, Labor Liberation degree, if they go on to laborliberation.com. So that's more important to me than the PhD that I got, their own free labor liberation. And what happened is I went to New York, and this is the last thing I will share. President Putin, President Xi, and President Trump, and the leaders of every country of the world. I was at Hotel Wellington at the back elevator, and there was a man with a Russian hat and coat, and jokingly I said, "Are you with the KGB?" And he looked shocked. And I thought, oh my God, he's with the KGB. I better. How can I save my life? This man might want to kill me for knowing too much. And it's almost like in my life as a child, I knew too much because I knew how to be awake, as all children are. But my parents had numbed and fallen under the spell of the trance, the card game trance. So I asked him, can you come upstairs? I can share with you my unmasking to audiences that I've done in Toronto, London, and Paris. And certain things happened that traumatized me, and I've been kind of stuck for a long time, for decades, I think. I'm kind of not present the way I used to be in the now. So he came upstairs and I shared the whole cycle with him. I handed him a comedy and tragedy mask so he'd have something in his hands so he might not strangle me. And when I finished, every night after that, for a few weeks, we would go for walks. And he'd leave me at a coffee shop. I'd have a hot chocolate. He'd go and do his business. And then he'd meet me at the coffee shop. We'd walk back to the hotel. And he always was talking about religion being an opiate of the people, of the masses. And that's all he seemed to say. In my response to him, all I said, I mentioned nothing about religion. All I said is, once we see that every baby born has 52 cards within, we are free. And that's the most important thing, free of jealousy and envy. Because deadlier than cancer, more addictive than heroin and other opiates, jealousy and envy. How do we dissolve it? Welcome every baby born to have 52 cards within. No more jealousy and envy. 52 cards equal 52 cards. He knocked on my door one evening. He said, Justin, I have to go back to Moscow unexpectedly in the morning. You must promise me, he took my hand, you must promise me something. You have to promise that you will tell your story to the United Nations and to the leaders of every country in the world. And I was kind of shocked, and he said, promise me, promise. And I said, okay, I promise. And he looked to the right and looked to the left, down the hall, and he said, God bless you. And when he said that, something within me healed. And a trance was broken, the spell was broken. Mark Slade and Bill Graham, I wasn't supposed to talk about it. Mark Slade, I wasn't supposed to share the research with anyone but him. And now I felt that there was hope. President Putin, President Trump, President Xi, and to the United Nations and the leaders of every country of the world. It took decades for me, the second time around, to have a rebirth right here on Earth. The first time I saw the trap of the card game trance, and how, regardless of what country we're from, what race we are, what religion, whether we're Democrat, Republican, communist, socialist, alphabet, everyone's a human being first. And for the KGB man to go through the change that he did and be willing to put himself out there and say to me, God bless you. He was blessed by his transformation and allowed me to come out of my hell spell. So I thank you for hearing me out. I thank you, Donald Trump, for hearing me out. You each have had vast life experiences, as we all do. And to acknowledge the value of each child allows us to recognize a place beyond groupthink, where just like coming out of our mother's womb, we can come out of the womb of all group pecking orders and allow peace on earth to be a reality to the degree that we are set free. Thank you. Unlabeled poem. May peace prevail on earth. May we see each other's worth and share a prayer so that all are free to turn agony into ecstasy. How can that ever be? Am I talking fantasy? Well, in wars, you must agree, symbols kill symbols. That's clear to see. In prejudice, crime, family struggles too. Everyone's a label, not a me or you. Lots of problems we have on earth have to do with the labels we get at birth. If you put a child up and another one down, we'll all stay lost with no common ground. To release the anger when not treated the same, we name a scapegoat to frame and blame. If we look outside to direct the pain, we create some enemy all over again. For you and me, and queens and kings, and every other head of state, the labels that our minds create can fill us full of hate. If we each peel all the words away, then everyone can see that beyond the words are love, world peace, and ecstatic harmony.
Liberation.
have just another song for label liberation, 'cause it's time to sing together, no matter where we're from. We can't have just another tune for label liberation. Let's have la-di-da-di-da, a melody for everyone. Can we sing words like peace and friendship without the spirit? Let's all feel the spirit, then everyone has won. Because everyone's a person. Look inside and we discover with label liberation. I'm a person first, my mother. You're a person first, my sister. You're a person first, my brother. Then we're all one family. Let's make label liberation. Let's make stepping back from symbols. Let's make peace and love and friendship. Make a change in you and me. Make a change in history. Promise kept to a KGB spy. Dear Presidents Putin, Xi, Trump, United Nations, and the leaders of every country in the world.
You and me, queens and kings, and every other head of state. The labels that our minds create can fill us full of hate. If we each peel all the words away, then everyone can see. And beyond the words, there's love, world peace, and ecstatic harmony. Come on, words, get beyond the words. Words, get beyond the words. L-A-B-E-L, L-A-B-E-L. Label liberation, label liberation.
Can we sing words like peace and friendship without the spirit? Let's all feel the spirit, then everyone has won. Because everyone's a person. Look inside and we discover with label liberation. I'm a person first, my mother. You're a person first, my sister. You're a person first, my brother. Then we're all one family. Let's make label liberation. Let's make stepping back from symbols. Let's make peace and love and friendship. Make a change in history.
I'm a person first, American second.
Спочатку інgat, 한국인 둘째.
Перш за все, я людина, а вже потім українка. Parliamo manuscript divenne l'anche.
I'm a person first, Australian second.
Come prima la persona, secondo l'italiano.
Label liberation, label liberation.
I'm a person first, British second. Вишенали binadamu başımızı sayın.
Rotomotoami manush দ্বিতীয়ত বাঙালি.
I'm a person first, Irish second.
Я человек, а потом уже русский.
Primero soy persona, después soy mexicano.
I'm a person first, Canadian second.
Soy una persona, después brasileño.
Primero soy persona, segundo de Colombia. D'abord je suis une personne et après je suis français.
I'm a person first, Scottish second.
Label liberation, label liberation.
Etc. Finally, keeping my promise to the KGB spy to tell everything. Anna Porter was an editor at the publishing house I submitted my manuscript to. She turned it down. And then I got a 1979 call from the publisher, Jack McClellan, saying, "Justin, I want to publish your book on its sociological literary merit. And I have to tell you, I've never had a manuscript polarized my publishing house as much as yours has. My senior editor, Anna, has threatened to quit and start her own publishing company if I dare publish your book. And my sales manager can't wait for me to arrange for him to have dinner with you. I said, why is she doing this? And he said, because your book deconstructs power in the clearest, simplest, most powerful way. And Anna is holding a winning hand. You're inviting every baby born to reclaim their 52-card wholeness. Well, Anna doesn't want anyone else to hold a winning hand. When after decades away in California, having therapy, dealing with post-traumatic stress related to the sexual assault and death threats by Mark Slade, I began to see a family doctor named Carolyn Bennett who delivered babies. And I guess for me it was symbolically, hey, maybe I will have a rebirth since she is my family doctor now. She got a letter from Ian Blue, a lawyer, saying that a chorus line was based on my unmasking to audiences in Toronto, London, and Paris, and he feels that the lawsuit that the LA Times feature talked about, verifying that they unmasked to audiences using my material but watering it down to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. What would happen is there still was a chance to activate a lawsuit. But I was going through a bizarre situation where I had amnesia about Bill Graham's sexual assault and death threat. Bill Graham had become Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister of Canada. And so what happened is I'm starting to have flashbacks, and I tell Dr. Carolyn Bennett, Ian Blue says to her he needs verification that I'm having flashbacks so that he can reactivate the New York lawsuit against a chorus line and show the court why my amnesia about Bill Graham's rape and death threat left me split off from any continuity of normal living that protected me with a total loss of memory of the shocking event so I could survive. Dr. Bennett said, of course I will give Ian Blue a letter verifying your new flashbacks that explain why you were unable to participate in the lawsuit. But instead, she phones Bill Graham, stops delivering babies, and joins him as a politician in the Liberal Party. So Ian Blue never got the verification of the flashbacks that I was terrified of and discussing with Carolyn Bennett. An entertainment lawyer who acted as an agent asked me to update my published book that Anna Porter had done her best to bury after it was published. So I worked on that and continued my therapy as I tried to integrate Mark Slade's sexual assault, Bill Graham's rape, and both their death threats, trying to get my research available to the public again after thousands of letters had come in initially with requests for knowing more about label liberation. What happened is I turned the manuscript in to this entertainment lawyer and went to see Rosalie Sharp, who was the wife of Isidore Sharp. Isidore, Bill Gates, and a Saudi prince owned all the Four Seasons hotels. And I was curious as to what Rosalie Sharp's memoir was going to be like when she was speaking at a Toronto library. When I got there, she was showing pictures of the Holocaust and her relatives that had died. The second picture was of the Rosedale Golf Club, and she said very complainingly how she had not been allowed to join with Izzy at that time because they were Jewish. Her third picture was her beautiful home right adjacent to the Rosedale Golf Club, kind of a finger in the air to all the people at the golf club who had forbidden them from joining at one time. When she was finished, I handed her an I'm a Person First label liberation button, and she said, "What does this mean?" I said, "Well, I was labeled retarded by my mother, who used to say, if you read something, it'll happen to your brain and you'll die, and I entered grade 1 public school at age 28. So Rosalie suddenly turned from elegant and refined to really gargoyle-ish, and she said, "Why would your mother label you retarded?" I said, "Well, my mother was labeled the devil and the jinx by her mother because she wasn't a boy to replace a dead son." So Rosalie said, well, why would your grandmother label your mother the devil and the jinx? I said, well, my grandmother was labeled the dumb one compared to her brilliant sister, her being the plain one compared to her beautiful sister, and the untalented one compared to my grandfather, a playwright and actor. Rosalie got up and left in a fury. And I sent her an email and saying, why were you so hostile to me? It felt as if you became the Rosedale Golf Club and I became the rejected Jew. When I had first met her that evening, I had mentioned in conversation that I just turned my manuscript in to this entertainment lawyer. She knew him. And what she did was phone him because he called me and he said, what did you say for Rosalie to get so upset with you? And I sent him the email, and what he did was drop the manuscript. I couldn't understand why Rosalie would be so vindictive and vicious. Well, in reading her book, it turned out that she did to her son what my mother did to me. Her son, Chris, in her book, she describes as, and I'm paraphrasing, my son Chris was born with the dubik, which is Yiddish for devil, of my father, and gave him a severe learning disorder that drove us all crazy. No, that's not true. She projected onto him. She needed someone like my mother needed someone to be a person that they could feel sorry for and look down upon. So she always saw him as incapable of learning the way I was forced to carry that role. And he showed her a mole that was changing color when he was 16, and she didn't get a second opinion, and he died very painfully of skin cancer at age 17. So I then learned that Munchausen's syndrome by proxy is a lot more common than people realize. If nurses have it, they can sometimes kill a patient in order to gain sympathy. If mothers have it, they often make their child sick one way or another in order to gain sympathy from other people. And sometimes the child dies. The entertainment lawyer called me furious at what I had done to upset Rosalie Sharp, who he said is a billionaire. I told him that I was just being honest and I had done nothing inappropriate to her. Well, he decided to drop my manuscript and took over displaying Rosalie's sexual explicit porcelain art at a museum he was involved with. When I first heard of Eckhart Tolle and his book The Power of Now and A New Earth, I was so enthusiastic that I bought copies of them and gave them away to people. When Oprah was interviewing him on Skype, it kept cutting out. And suddenly, Eckhart, not realizing he was on camera, blurted out, confidentially, I've taken some LSD. Oprah, surprised, shouted, confidentially? And I realized in that moment that he had been in the audience when I had unmasked in London, so that when he tells people that he had been depressed and suicidal at that time, which was the honest truth, he tells a little white lie when he says he had his enlightenment sitting on a park bench in London. Just a thank you from Tolle would have been a delight. When I met Oprah during her filming of a show and we stood there holding hands, I was still so lost in post-traumatic stress and dissociation, trying to digest the absolute arrogance on the part of two men in positions of power sexually assaulting me in order to gain whatever sense of superiority they could feel over whatever I was sharing with them, that I was unable to do anything but cry and say to Oprah, goodbye. I knew when we survive threats to our very existence, each emotional death blow can become an illuminating stepping stone, a balancing act, readying us for an understanding that as a species, we can give ourselves an aha that allows the transcending of human history's cycle of private and public wars, prejudice, generation gaps, violence, and alienation. I was delighted when the publisher of the New York Times was very interested in label liberation, the attempts to suppress the research, and the KGB man's eagerness for me to share the reality of everybody's potential with the world. He also knew that Dr. Paul Simonov, a psychophysiologist and psychiatrist from Moscow, when meeting me at the time I was 28 years old taking grade 1 public school at UCLA, he shared with me Russia's top secret, drawing the words fear and an arrow to anger, and then the word information, saying fear causes anger, information cancels out the fear and cancels out the anger. And I, in reply, said, well, fear causes anger. Fear causes labels. Labels can kill. Information can kill the fear, anger, and the labels. And he said, "Da." And we had some vodka as celebration for the label liberation aha button that was born. So when an interview was arranged for me at the New York Times, as it turns out, life is very synchronistic. The journalist that the New York Times picked was Anna Porter's daughter, Catherine. So the editor who turned down my book and then deliberately did everything in her power to bury the book after it was published before quitting and starting her own publishing company, the choice was made that her daughter was going to interview me. I phoned and sent emails to the New York Times explaining why I would rather have anyone else do the interview. But for some reason, it didn't reach the right editors. And even though the New York Times publisher was eager to have the story told, even his personal secretary was furious when I tried to reach out to them and plead for anyone else. So, Catherine Porter, the daughter, demanded that I be interviewed by her, lied, and said she was going to come to my place and conduct the interview by recording it, and instead, what has happened is, as far as I know, sabotage. So even the New York Times, who I honor and respect as a beacon of truth against fake news and the political attempts to hypnotize people into believing lies, somehow, at least at the moment, has been silenced by duplicity, hypocrisy, and sabotage. If the New York Times senior editors choose to give themselves enough introspective shock treatments and drive themselves sane, they would be brave enough to stop deliberately burying a true story about how we as a species can easily overcome all forms of prejudice by escaping our imprisonment within a limiting reality taught to us through groupthink hypnosis. Because we are all taught, including news editors, that we can only exist as a symbol and die without waking up within a mind-made, intergenerationally scripted group womb of winner versus loser, limiting reality, we unconsciously fear expanding our sense of self beyond our normal barbaric boundaries that we are hypnotized into from birth on. To experience label liberation is to overcome the fake news lie we are taught, perpetuating, in this instance by the New York Times, that men have less valuable qualities than women. The other lie that humanity perpetuates is the denial of our being, in essence, atoms in space, and therefore, at our core, we all are each other's identity-free equal. After winning the being born lottery, naked, unmasked, and lie-free, we automatically become prisoners of the alphabet and are indoctrinated by labels to robotically act out like actors, following scripts of the lucky versus the unlucky, prejudice-filled, polarized, bluffing, card game-like trances. For a newspaper editor to not take my request for an objective journalist to interview me at first felt sadistic, until I remembered how when people see themselves as holding a winning hand, it takes the state of grace to welcome every baby born to also have 52 cards within, and habitually treat all of us, stranger or not, with the same undistorted, unbiased respect and consideration. People either find within themselves the state of grace to simultaneously see themselves as male or female, and a combination of emotional states embracing all the other qualities making up our identities. And know, at our core, we are all more than the three-dimensional world that is stuck based on a card game, trance, that our species has been so far imprisoned in, and we can evolve to recognize our spiritual oneness, as well as forgive those who are still threatened and locked into time and space and labels that need its opposite for reflection. Those of us clinging to our egos instead of living life off the teeter-totter would benefit most from embracing a dual reality of simultaneously living in a world of time and space, as well as acknowledging being made up of atoms and existing as process, energy, change, ultimately enjoying knowing I'm a person first, label liberation, and so is everyone else. The editors knew that their publisher Arthur specifically asked that one of their journalists interview me about the fact that a KGB spy I met in New York City urged me to save my own emotional life when the spy recognized I had become lost in dissociation and PTSD after 2 sexual assaults, death threats, and demands that my research to ease all human conflict was deliberately silenced by the 2 male assaulters and a few women in positions of power who did not want to be upstaged by insights that transcended their overviews and challenged their holding a winning hand. I described to the KGB operative that from the day I went into the foster home and saw educational psychiatrist Dr. Tukti, who said, "Do it," to my goal of seeking peace on earth, when I began interviewing countless people around the globe, asking, "What is the most hurtful experience you remember having?" I was surprised at what turned out to be our so-called civilized society's most secret taboo, when thousands of men responded, "I can't believe I'm telling you this," revealing that from childhood on, they had mothers, older sisters, aunts, female babysitters, or other women who verbally, physically, and sexually abused them. After the KGB spy heard my life's journey, he thankfully broke the hell spell I was in by saying, "Promise me that you will tell your story to the United Nations and the leaders of every country in the world." He knew that before the 2 sexual assaults, I had been doing just that. To reboot beyond my dissociation and PTSD, I had to reclaim the optimism of relearning that everyone labeled good, bad, or anything else is born with their better angels intact before being indoctrinated into a polarizing, bluffing card game like trance. If the New York Times management team face what we all learned after coming out of our mother's womb, and were hypnotized to consider our need to win by manufacturing losers for reflection, we can easily overcome our ego-fed fears and universalize our dualistic identities. As soon as we do, we can claim an awareness that people acquire when discovering, as I did, that when we glorify women, or vice versa, we soul murder both genders and blind ourselves to our full potential as awake, evolving human beings. By transcending barbaric, often deadly, us against them, female versus male, competitive symbolic thinking, and instead embrace all of humanity's I and thou potential, we reclaim our gender, race, etc. equality. The New York Times editors would then recognize how my gender played a role in their act of soul murder, cavalierly dismissing a story of sexual abuse of a male victimized by two men in positions of power, who the New York Times editors may not wish to admit that they identify with power-wise. In other words, more consciously expanded editors would also see that just as we are indoctrinated to go from cradle to grave, polarizing each other as he versus she, smart versus dumb, lucky versus unlucky, straight versus gay, and so on, even the most seemingly sophisticated New York Times editors can be completely under the symbolic spell of gender resentments. And if they have unresolved mother and father issues, be these editors men or women, they can be oblivious to their potential to reclaim their birthright of 52-card wholeness and take delight in everyone's identity-free rebirth. No wonder the editors ignored my emails that pleaded for them to choose any journalist to interview me other than Catherine Porter, who I specifically said was the biased daughter of Anna Porter, the book editor, who turned down my manuscript. Then when Anna's boss, Jack, decided to publish my writing on its sociological and literary merit, Jack told me Anna threatened to quit and start her own publishing company if he dared publish my book. When Jack published it, became ill and was away, Anna did her best to bury the I'm a person first label liberation research. The New York Times editors ignored the fact that Anna's daughter, Catherine, had spoken with me on the telephone a year or so before, while she worked for the Toronto Star, and I reached out to her hoping for her empathy to make things right. This was before she worked for the New York Times and their publisher Arthur asked their editors to interview me. Back then, I had told Catherine the whole story about her mother's deliberate and ruthless sabotage. I also told Catherine that I was motivated to call her because her father, a lawyer, had visited me saying, "Your book has to get published and your story told. I'll get my wife Anna to find a New York agent for you." That is when he and I realized the coincidence that Anna was his wife and had been my publisher Jack's senior editor. And it was his wife, Anna's boss Jack, who had told me, "Anna has threatened to quit and start her own publishing company if I dare publish your book." Anna was boiling over with envy when she read the description of your journey that I placed at the back of your book. She does not want anyone to get your critical message of everyone's equal value at birth before the card game trance you described sets in for all of us. And I'm so sorry to say that while I was away, she became more diabolical, sabotaged its success, and lied about it to my face. When Anna's husband realized his wife had previously buried my published book, he yelled, "Jack's a goddamn liar," and then rushed out enraged. When his daughter Catherine heard the whole truth, she said something about, "I sure don't want this story to see the light of day," and she hung up. The New York Times also learned from my emails pleading for their objectivity how their new journalist Catherine has already shown that she intends to sabotage her interview with me, just as Catherine's mother sabotaged my published book. Once her pre-interview with me on the phone made it clear that Catherine tries to hide the fact that she suffers from the all-too-common disease of ego inflation that my research describes, where she learned from her family, and they learned from society, to lie as a way to outdo and be superior to others in order to gain a sense of being a winner, that her mind conditions her to always have someone to look down upon. For her to accept me as an equal in essence, in her present state of mind, such an acknowledgement would feel like a death blow to her, as long as she has the knee-jerk reaction that a lot of ego-consumed leaders and others desperate for power have, that becomes a calculating habit of identifying as that winner and manufacturing others like myself as losers in order to maintain their greed-ridden, power-hungry, tenuous sense of reality. The hurt of Catherine's deliberate lying and obvious need to sabotage the interview, along with the newspaper staff's indifference to how I was treated, eased for me when I understood that they did not go through the losing and the winning that propelled me as a joker out of the card game, discovering reality completely free from all projections. Jesus, Buddha, the Torah, the Quran, and other spiritual pointers to mind-escaped enlightenment are rarely understood fully enough to awaken completely to enlightenment. A revelation that came to me, referred to as labor liberation, suggests a shortcut to ease human suffering. Simply listen to a story that takes us back to when we were born uncontaminated, naked, unmasked, and life-free. This aha activated when I stripped bare of a false identity that labeled me retarded, propelling me all the way back to a state of pre-conditioned awareness before I was indoctrinated into the same card game trance that Catherine is programmed to believe everyone has to exist in. As I deliberately tore up my robotic card game-like polarized script based on society's urging us to be masked and lie through life, Catherine, like many others, sensed there was a threat to embrace my reality fully in a way that could move her to change and activate a new state of mind-expanded awareness. She feared and therefore avoided a new understanding that would wobble her jealous, envious, and greed-filled ego, which has been like some heroin addict seeking to ride stiletto high on an identity of Catherine Porter, New York Times Global Canada Toronto Bureau Chief. When I presented to audiences on stage or in a workshop setting, my journey could be digested and learned from. In fact, people desperate to get high on heroin don't have to risk an opiate death when the highs and lows of life are laid out before them in monologue, song, and dance. As my storytelling unfolded, audiences recognized that we can die as a symbol and experience a rebirth right out of the womb of all group thinking, right here on Earth. Catherine, as well as her mother before her, who both soul murdered my research through deliberate sabotage, the two men with power and control issues who sexually assaulted me, and a few others who desperately tried to obliterate what I represented to them, had to be put into perspective by me in order to once again find balance and peace in my life. Forgive me for possibly being redundant here instead of remaining silent or committing suicide or murder, and be able to at least understand why some people are pushed to commit suicide or murder. My survival so far in life has been based on speaking truthfully. Now, completing laying all my cards on the table has the goal of escaping the viciousness of a newspaper staff who, in protecting their own, as despotic as a journalist's daughter covering for her tyrannical editor mother can be, these New York Times decision makers behaved as ruthlessly as my pathological parents, or the political power abusers that these same newspaper editors so freely look down upon and criticize for having lack of ethics and integrity. As long as the newspaper publishes stories on how producer Harvey Weinstein was a symbol of cruelty and women are merely victims, and research such as labor liberation, inviting an expanded perspective on all our identities in order to diminish all forms of prejudice and abuse, never sees the light of day, how can we overcome human suffering until we as a species dare acquire the ability to escape all polarities, enough to claim an objective overview that sets everyone free from all psychological projections and distorting dualistic labels that limit who we are in essence. If only the New York Times editors choose to heed the wise words of Canadian Senator Ann Cools, who once was considered the epitome of feminist values until in 1995, on International Women's Day, she was cited as having said, "Behind every abusing husband is an abusing mother." Suddenly, she was criticized by feminist groups and is considered an anti-feminist for her work supporting and lobbying for the rights of fathers. Senator Cools argues that she hasn't changed at all. It's the women's movement that has. As she states, the radicals have hijacked the agenda. They see men as evil and will stop at nothing to ensure the superiority of women. The New York Times are not applying equal rights to both genders by allowing the burying of their story on my research that the KGB Spy knew throws light on easing human conflict. Their editors are too blinded by their own gender duplicity and would benefit by rereading an opinion article that they published on Monday, October 16th, 2017, written by Sarah Polley, a Canadian writer, director, and actor. Polley ends with her words, "I hope that the ways in which women are degraded, both obvious and subtle, begin to seem like a thing of the past. For that to happen, I think we need to look at what scares us the most. We need to look at ourselves. What have we been willing to accept out of fear, helplessness, a sense that things can't be changed? What else are we turning a blind eye to in all aspects of our lives? What else have we accepted that somewhere within us we know is deeply unacceptable? And what now will we do about it? May I suggest doing about it what the New York Times publisher Arthur requested, following through with a journalist not fearful of discovering an answer to what Sarah Polley asks. What scares us the most? How about elaborating on learning to live life identity-free and discovering our birthright, seeing every baby born as our 52 card equal in essence? As soon as we have such an aha, we will know why this video, titled A Promise Kept to a KGB Spy, subtitled Dear Presidents Putin, Xi, Trump, the United Nations, and the leaders of every country in the world, was made, and is a portion of a documentary series soon to be released called Daring to Reboot Our Thinking. Catherine Porter did not dare to reboot her thinking, although without any doubt, her mind will find a way to lie to those she hopes stay gullible and be able to sabotage to justify her inept and hostile reactions. She sounded frightened when repeatedly asking me on the phone, "But what is your research about?" After each explicit answer, she would ask the same question over again and again, indicating that she was perplexed and resentful. Even when I put my website developer on the phone and he explained, her obvious racing mind chose to tune out. Everyone is entitled to be where they are at any point in time. It is her lying to me and to her New York Times supervisor that she did not remember our prior lengthy conversation, where she learned everything about her mother's interference and her father's visit. Catherine was determined, then and now, that this story never gets told. As Sarah Polley states, what else have we accepted that somewhere within us we know is deeply unacceptable. And what now will we do about it? Regarding Catherine Porter convincing the New York Times that my story has no value, here are comments from sexually abused women after my being asked to speak at the organization Reclaim Your Voice on October 28, 2017. Clearly, like her mother Anna, Catherine did not want me to reclaim my voice. We all must watch out for those with the need to censor reality, replacing truth with fake news. Finally, for the New York Times chairman and publisher, this email is from editorial director, New York Times Global, the New York Times, Jody Redoran. July 13th, 2017. Dear Mr. Thomas, I am the editor who asked Catherine Porter to reach out to you, and she has briefed me on your meeting and surrounding conversations. I know you have a story to tell, and I'm glad you are finding an outlet through your book. But this is not a story for the New York Times. We have let Arthur know this, along with Dean Beckett, the executive editor. We certainly appreciate all the time you have spent talking to us and wish you good luck, but we consider this matter closed. All the best, Jody. Editorial Director, New York Times. The following legal letter from psychiatrist F.W. Furlong, M.D., to lawyer Raymond Colladi about the sexual assaults could be relevant to the New York Times. Dr. Furlong's and Raymond Colladi's understanding have been life-saving and may open the eyes and heart of New York Times editor Jody, whose email reply reveals to me a lack of discernment and shunning of human empathy as she disregarded my plea for an unbiased, objective journalist to conduct the interview. When informed that their New York Times choice, Catherine Porter, was prejudiced in order to protect her mother, Anna Porter, who was my previous book publisher, Jack McClellan's senior editor, when he said, I'm so sorry, Justin. It was Anna's jealousy and envy that caused her to deliberately do everything in her power to sabotage how I overcame my fear of. Just as it was on its way to invite us to stop our damn lying and lay all our cards on the table. Schadenfreude. Pleasure derived by someone from another person's misfortune. People who enjoy someone else's suffering. To overcome jealousy, envy, greed, and Schadenfreude, simply repeat until it truly sinks in and the brainwashing dissolves. Every baby won the being born lottery with 52 cards within. And bingo, we have dehypnotized ourselves, free from a winner needing a loser trance. These words can act like a magic carpet, carrying us beyond the polarizing, bluffing card game-like trance, and dissolves jealousy, envy, and greed, as well as the need for all opiates to get high. Because we have awakened from the above versus below, polarizing groupthink, mind-made zombie-like winner versus loser, card game trance. Once escaping a teeter-totter existence and knowing that our birthright is that of being a person first, we can land gently on our feet, and presto, there is an automatic reclaiming for every baby at any age who won the being born lottery, the feeling of our 52-card wholeness. We have overcome our fear of an identity-transcended rebirth, welcoming everyone to be naked, unmasked, and lie free. So most respectfully, dear Presidents Putin, Xi, Trump, the United Nations, and the leaders of every country in the world, thanks to the KGB Spy who encouraged me to give my research one more try, to say to all forms of prejudice, goodbye.
You know, we see the pressures on these children younger and younger. Now, I remember being a teenager before I felt the pressure of needing to keep up with my peers, wear what they're wearing, style my hair the way they're styling it, buy the same shoes that everybody around me is wearing. I'm fortunate enough to be able to say my son, as a 9-year-old already, is himself not falling into that trap. Will he later on? We don't know. You know, unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure. There's more pressure on him than I can keep off. He's being bombarded with social media, his peers alone, neighbors, everything they see on TV. They're consistently being told what their image should be, what it should be projected, and what society expects of them.
When I was taking grade 1 at age 28, coming out of the trance where I had been brainwashed to believe that I was retarded so my parents could feel superior to someone because each of them had a sibling that was glorified by their mother.
Superior to them, though.
That's right. That's right. So it's all intergenerational scripting that we can hopefully wake up from.
It's a chain reaction and the ripple effect, whichever way you want to look at it.
Right. A woman came to see me after a presentation I made, and she told me that she could kill her father for favoring her until her kid brother came along and then favored her kid brother and ignored her. Then she said she could kill her husband because her husband left her for his secretary. So I said, Harriet, it's important to see men and women as persons first, as dances of energy, never to be trapped in any kind of group think, not stereotyping anyone into any kind of pecking order. So, men are people first, women are people first. We're all atoms and space. So, we all matter because we are matter. So what happened is, I said, see these foo dogs? They represent paradox and duality. And we cannot enter the temple of our own lives until we put all duality into perspective. Step off the teeter-totter, lay our cards on the table, etc. So I said, this is the male, his foot is on the world, and her foot is on the baby. So Harriet said, "See, Justin, it's a man's world. He has all the power. She just takes care of the kid." And I said, "No, Harriet, his foot is on the world. Her foot is on him from the time he's a baby. All of us, men and women, have to decode mama and put everyone into perspective."
Only you and you alone can make me feel like this. Only you and you alone can thrill me with such bliss. When I'm freed from thoughts and labels, everything is new. The past and future are but dreams or nightmares that aren't true. For years you have been far away, and yet you're always near. Just close my eyes, become my breath, and time will disappear. Reality will break our spells of in, out, below, above, and bring us each back to the now, to taste agape love.
I dedicate this song to the child within my grandmother, the child within Queen Elizabeth, and the child within Rose Kennedy. The Grandma Queen sits on her throne. Beneath her feet her kingdom lies. She taught them well to play the roles, the games that get them to the top. But where is that? The top is death, the teeter-totter game to win. The losers are the world at large. To kill a life, a common sin. Her sweet old lady face does hide a bitter rage of unlived life. The child in her was never born, her soul too dry to even cry. She let my father find his way. Without the warmth, without the breast, her doing so just left me cold. My father could not build his nest. Her mother was another queen who gave to her the same, and thus the cycle moves, the hurt gets past, and in the end, it's up to us.